Hi everybody, welcome to Divorce Workshop Talks. Today it's a special series we're starting with Shauna Warden, our divorce coach. Don't forget that Just Separated Divorce Workbook is coming out very soon. We're super excited about that. Hi Shauna.
Hi, Karen.
Sorry we're a bit late.
No worries. I totally understand.
Thanks. So today's like a start of our series of how to divorce high conflict.
Yes. And, I think the catalyst behind us going live with this and doing a series on this is that we both experienced it, and a lot of our clients and people in our universe experience it. And unless you have been in this position, you really have no idea about all of the patterns and how the strategies of how to deal with it. So I'm happy that we're doing this.
Yeah, you were the first person I thought of when I said, let's do this type of high conflict series, because I think it's so big that I think one part wasn't going to be enough.
Mm-hmm.
Not that we're going to be able to get through all of it, but the thing that I notice a lot with myself, and if anyone else is out there, is I wasn't even aware that I was really in high conflict. At the ending of it, I started noticing some patterns, and but it wasn't until almost a year later that I said, I think I'm trying to divorce someone who's really high conflict. I don't know if, can you tell, is that similar to you, or did you different?
I mean, sort of, but I mean, and you and I think got divorced right around the
Mm-hmm.
same time, give or take a year. And I think the concept of narcissism or high conflict really wasn't as vocalized as it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will say that I really didn't even realize it until maybe a couple years into the divorce, where
Mm-hmm.
I just was like, what is going on? And I'm trying to, ameliorate the issues here with this person, and it's not getting me anywhere, and I don't understand why. And until I started doing my own research and, going to therapy and talking to professionals, I didn't have the words to describe what I was going through. And
Mm-hmm.
now, luckily, it's becoming more vocalized and more awareness is shining onto it. So that's a great thing for people who are going through it now. But before, yeah, to answer your question, no, I had no idea. I didn't know when I was in the marriage. I didn't know when we were getting divorced, until it was just like you're banging your head
Mm-hmm.
against the wall and you're like, why is this happening? And how do I deal with this type of person?
Yeah, and I think another thing I want to tell people is it's a different strategy, because I had this naivety, like I was really naive. Okay, well, this divorce will be okay, right? I had hope that it's all going to, but I don't know why I thought that, because if they weren't rational before, what would make them more rational now? Like, what would make them
Mm-hmm.
think differently now and think, yeah, if I'm difficult during the marriage, why would I be easy after? And I think that's a bit naivety on our part, is we think, well, of course they're going to just settle, or of course they're going to, they want to move forward and all that. And I'm like, they want to move forward on their terms, not on negotiated terms, right? So
100%. I think that is hitting the nail on the head, because I had the same idea where, the marriage didn't turn out the way I wanted. I didn't have the fairy tale marriage, but somehow I still thought I would have the fairy tale divorce for some reason. And yes, like you said, very naive.
yeah. Yeah, I also want to mention, so some of the things that you said something before about the patterns of behavior, right? And that's something I for us to speak about too, because when you look back in your marriage, you can never, once you realize what you were in, you can never unsee that,
Mm-hmm.
and all those patterns of behavior. So that's something that they should probably, if they're in the marriage still or out, like getting divorced that start looking for patterns of normally bad behavior.
Yeah, so if we just kind of want to list some of those things like cheating,
Mm-hmm.
taking control of the finances, being very manipulative. I know I hear a lot of clients say out in the public, if you were to tell people in this person's, group,
Mm-hmm.
coworkers or friends, they might say, "Oh, he's the nicest person." And I'm just using stereotypical genders. It can go both ways.
Mm-hmm.
He's the nicest person. He would do anything for anybody. And then behind closed doors, it's very opposite.
Yeah, they're very, very, they can be very, very charming. And that's how we may have got sucked in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is to this.
Yeah. And one thing that always made me feel better, because I feel like we're always digging for things that make us feel better about our choices, is that um, narcissistic men, at least, do not go after weak women. They go after very strong women, very educated, very, willful and powerful women. And so if you are the victim of this type of personality, it's almost a nod to you, as because it's such a conquest for them to
Mm-hmm.
take down these women who otherwise are very smart and educated and well put together and have a lot going on,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah. And even if you had boundaries before you got married and you tried to instill boundaries in the marriage, even though sometimes, they can be more porous in a marriage, obviously, but I want to just mention that when you start getting divorcing this type of person, you try to have strong boundaries and you say it externally, like, I don't want you in the house anymore. Don't tell them your boundaries. You have to be very, very careful, because they will just use that and flip it over and say, why can't I pay for this house? Or they will just use any boundary you say externally, like if you vocalize it. So you have to be really careful on how you strategize with, oh, I'm sorry. Holly just said, I'm in a marriage with a narc. Oh, I'm sorry, Holly. Shauna and I've been there. You'll get through it though.
Yes.
Anyways, yeah, so I was just mentioning that, like, I also want to mention that, have you ever heard of the acronym FOG?
Go ahead and tell us what that is.
So that was discovered, I'm just going to grab my paper here, by Susan Forward, and the acronym is fear, obligation, or guilt.
Mm-hmm.
So I use that with clients too, right? Because the more aware you are, the more you can be, unlike we were not prepared. I didn't know the cycle of patterns of abuse that they were using, right? So they use fear, right? Like threats. And they'll use obligation, where it's like, well, look what I've done for you, right? The obligation and the guilt, right? And then you can see those patterns and going, well, that's what they've been using all these years.
Right. And rewinding it a little bit more, even further than that, a lot of us who grew up in households where this was also the parent-child relationship are more likely to fall into a marriage that's like this, because even though it's not healthy, it is comfortable. And so I think for a long time, we have just grown accustomed, especially as women, have grown accustomed to the people pleasing, to the guilt, doing things out of guilt or obligation to our parents or to our spouse. And so it's a very deep rooted pattern that we ourselves have to wake up and realize that we are part of the problem as well. And going back to what you were stating, that's where those boundaries start to come into play. And they're not natural. I mean, this is years and years and years of testing out boundaries, seeing what works for us, and it's not going to feel comfortable at first, but it's just like any other muscle. The more you work it, the more you exercise it, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, we have to be, I didn't know that when I first started the divorce process. And another thing I want to mention is be mindful of trying to defend everything, because they will attack you on everything. Right? They will attack your mental health. They'll attack your mothering or fathering. whatever they want to do, they'll attack because they want that rise out of you. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the things I did over the first couple of years is I defend. I would be like, you can't,
Mm-hmm.
don't talk to me. And you would go through lawyers and it would be a waste of money, right? And it's just like
Mm-hmm.
really, really, it's really natural that we want to defend. Like, of course we want to defend ourselves. Like mine, mine, the children's aid called, right? And I'm like, and my therapist said, is there cocaine on the floor? Is there, you know what I mean? Like, so I had to calm myself down and say, okay, only answer back what really needs to be messaged.
Yes, and I totally fell into that trap too. And so do a lot of my clients at the beginning, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like, they're sending you these paragraph long emails or texts, and then you're sending back bullet points going
Yeah.
over every point that they're making. You have a counterpoint, and you just really drive yourself crazy because at the end of the day, um, it doesn't matter. Defending yourself, like you said, makes it worse almost, right? Because now they've sucked you back
Mm-hmm.
in. They're still
Back in.
getting this, you know, I was so shocked after the divorce where it was like, I got to the point where I'm like, you divorced me. Can you just leave me alone? Like, I'm talking to you more now as a divorced partner than we did when we were married. Like, so it's still, and that goes back to that the
Yeah.
control piece where even though it's negative attention, they still have your attention.
Yeah. Holly asked, I heard not to tell the narc your boundaries. They'll do, they'll want to do what they want. What's true, what they want. It's true, Holly. They'll never change and they'll not, you know, they need control still. So it's most about protecting yourself, right? I say that to clients too. It's more about how you do rather than them because you can't, that's who they are and that's pretty ingrained in them. So they're not going to change, right? So
And talking about boundaries, so like let's talk about that a little more because it might be confusing for people who are listening to this when you say, don't tell them your boundaries.
mm.
So can you go into that more and explain like what you should be doing?
So it's more of an internal thing. So if it's like you kind of have to play the game as well, right? I don't want um, him dropping by the house at all with something he's saying, right? Like, I'm bringing you this. Then you say, no, we'll figure it out another way. It's for yourself. It's not for them because if you tell them, I don't want you in the house anymore, do you really think they're going to listen to you? So it's more of for yourself, right? It's like what you need to protect yourself and
Mhm.
don't tell them. I'm not, yeah, sorry.
No, no, you're totally fine. I just want to take it a step further and at least let's have a dialogue about this
Mm-hmm.
because maybe we come from different angles on this. And so with my clients and for myself, what I talk about is expressing your boundaries so that they know
Mm-hmm.
that it exists and maybe not with, your ex-husband or ex-wife, but just in general, maybe with your family, friends, whatever the case may be. Um, but what is your boundary? And so for in this example, or what are you going to do if they violate that boundary? So
Mm-hmm.
if you come to my house, I will then what? Call the cops or you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I
What's
guess it
going to happen if
depends,
they
right? Yeah,
violate that
yeah.
boundary? Yeah, and I think it does depend on what the boundary is, right? Because it could just be something that you set up for yourself. Like for me, because and we all, most of us are like this, especially with text messages. They fire off some spicy text to you, you're shooting it right back to them, right? And so my boundary was, unless it was an emergency with
Mm-hmm.
my
Mm-hmm.
child that needed to be addressed right that second, which you shouldn't be texting me anyway, you should be calling me or whatever. I'm going to give myself 8 hours,
Mm-hmm.
12 hours, 24 hours, whatever that looks like to respond because whatever I'm going to say initially is going to be vastly different than what I'm going to say after 24 hours.
See, what you described right there is internal boundary, right? You're
Right.
saying another example too. I had a lady whose mother was not stopping, like just da, 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 and it's like what the exes can do, and she just said no, no, like this I'm doing this for me, right? So that's
Right.
what I mean by internal, right? It's like you've
Mm-hmm.
decided, okay, I'm like an email. You get a nasty legal letter or a nasty email from them and you're like, no, I'm going to sleep on this. I'm not going to react. That's your internal boundary, meaning you don't need to say to them, I'm not going to answer you back for another 24 hours and don't talk to me right
Right.
now.
Yep. So
You
I
know?
was just kind of wanting to express there are kind of different boundaries, and
Yes.
depending on what the type of boundary is, like if it's just something for yourself, like the responding within 24 hours, yeah, you don't need to tell your ex, I'm
Yep.
not responding to this for 24 hours. But if it is something like showing up at your house unannounced, then they need to know
Yeah.
what is the consequence for me doing this. And also, you need to follow through on that boundary, because I
Yep.
think that is really where the big disconnect comes from, because this person has been allowed to violate your boundaries for however many years of your marriage that they've been doing it. So they
Mm-hmm.
know, oh, she's just talking. She's not going to actually do anything if I do this.
Yeah.
So the second piece of that is actually being strong enough to follow through on those boundaries.
Yeah, and that can be hard, especially for people pleasers, right? Especially for, women and men that, give, and they don't. It makes, as you said a while back, it makes you uncomfortable, right? It's us feeling uncomfortable because we don't like conflict, we don't like confrontation. It's just that now you really have to really guard yourself and protect yourself in this process, right?
Right. And I think for women going through this type of high conflict divorce, and this is what I would have to tell myself over and over and still to this day do, is that whatever you know, 99.9% of the time, if there's a negative consequence, that consequence is directly related to this narcissist's actions, and
Mm-hmm.
they are never held accountable for their actions. And so then it becomes your fault. You're the one to blame, even though most likely it's as a result of their actions, but
Yeah.
they're going to very quickly turn it around on you.
Well, that's projection, right? Like everything is because that's a defense mechanism, right? They just can't handle taking responsibility, so they deflect, and go, "Your fault." It's just easier. That was basically my whole marriage was everything was my fault, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the pattern. But it's still the point is, and we're going to do this in January about post-divorce abuse, but that's the pattern that continues after. It doesn't go away. That's why wanted to mention something about we should make sure we tell people they should document a lot of these things to make sure especially because you had a really good blog about court and the narcissist type of person. So they should definitely check that out if for the court and the high conflict, because that's another area that can get really tricky.
Yes, and I can't remember on our okay, well I guess that kind of ties into our post-divorce abuse segment that we're going to be doing. Going to court with a high conflict person is a whole other ball
Mm-hmm.
game. And so that was really what spurred me to write that blog, because you really can't, and I think this is a big hurdle for people that are dealing with this type of personality trait, is that you can apply logic to
No.
it. And that's what I kept running into, this roadblock of it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Logically, none of this makes sense. And you do feel crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I feel like we were talking about signs of being in a relationship with a narcissist, is that you feel crazy because it's not logical. And if you are coming with a logical stance, you're going to constantly be, hitting
Yeah.
roadblocks.
Yeah. That's something that you, even with your friends and family, that's one thing I want to mention. Even when you talk to them, and they don't really understand it either, they don't really get it either, right? So
Right.
then that's that frustrating, because you kind of can feel like, is anyone understanding me? Because no one understands it unless you've been in it.
Yeah, and that is again what I think we started talking about at the beginning of this conversation, is that I think that is why it's important to build a team of
Mm-hmm.
people like myself and yourself when you're going through this, because not, either they are in denial or they haven't realized it yet, but most people don't know or haven't experienced this type of relationship. And so if you are in the middle of getting a divorce and you're leaning on your friends and family, as you should,
Mm-hmm.
some of the advice that you're getting is not going to apply to
Mm-hmm.
this situation because, again, logic doesn't apply.
Also, yeah, and also if you're still in the marriage, you can have family and friends enabling it still, meaning they're
Mhm.
like, you have everything, right? You have this beautiful house, you have beautiful children, or you have everything. Why would you ever leave,
Mhm.
right? And I'm just, that's one example out of many, but they can be, and that can make you even feel like, oh my goodness, like, and then you feel even doubting, even though you feel it's a horrific marriage, so then you're like, well, I really can't talk to them of what's really going on. For me, it started,
Yeah.
for me personally, I had little cracks that were starting to show up 8 years prior, and
Mhm.
I was starting to let these, just one example is my girls played soccer and I was at a soccer tournament, and I said to the friends in the soccer group, I go, would any of you guys ever marry again? And they said, no, 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 no. All the women said no. And I said, oh, so and here's my naivety. Every marriage is tough then, right? Every marriage is tough. So then I'm like,
Mhm.
okay. So I went along, and then I went out to the mall with one of my friends, and I told her a couple examples, and I said, ha ha ha, when I told him what he would say to me. And she's like, that's really mean. And I went, oh, right. Like I had no idea. Like that's how naive I was. And then I started going,
Mhm.
oh boy, like something's not right here, right? So that's kind of how I just want to bring that up a little bit, and how some of the cracks can start showing in that way. I kind
Mhm.
of went off on a tangent there, but
No,
um,
I think that that all makes sense to me. And, it's one of those things that I see over and over again on like Instagram and things that pop up. But sometimes we don't know what we're experiencing is bad or traumatic or not
mhm,
right until we are talking to our therapist or talking to our friends or talking to a third party that really doesn't have any skin in the game.
mhm,
And not until we vocalize those things do we realize, oh, maybe that's not normal, right?
mhm,
That just like as a side piece to your
mhm.
tangent, as you called it, it's fascinating to me, and this could be a whole other series that we do, but the amount of women who just would not choose marriage at this point. I mean, it's just,
Mhm,
we're getting to the point where we always used to marry out of necessity, right? Because we had
mhm.
to, just from a society standpoint. It's just really fascinating to me how many women now are just like, no, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, we should
It's
do a live on that, Shauna, because it is and I don't want our stories to worry every woman out there, because
right.
you're with a lovely person, I'm with a lovely person, so that's not, so there are really good people out there still. It's just that you're right, there is kind of this, I've seen it too, even with my own daughters, right? It's like what they've been through themselves as children, which we'll talk about next month. But I also want to mention that even you and I, like I grew up with a narcissist parents, because I had a stepmother too. My mother was not. And even I wasn't really aware, right? So, so you have childhood of narcissist, and then you have a narcissist, so for you and I, and for anyone that's trying to leave or in the divorce, it takes a lot of courage too, right? Like
Mhm.
it's not an easy thing. So I want to give that a shout out to, like, because it takes a lot of strength to get out of these.
It does. And I think, like what you're saying, when you start, if you're divorcing somebody that's a narcissist or high conflict, and the more you start learning about it, it's amazing once you realize how many narcissists are in your life.
Mhm. Yes.
Sometimes it almost seems like everybody is a narcissist.
Yeah.
And that also brings me to another point that I really wanted to make sure that I mentioned on this live is that even if you think you're divorcing a narcissist, I strongly encourage people not to label their ex as a
Mm-hmm.
narcissist. Maybe when you're talking to your girlfriends or your therapist or whatever, but certainly not to their lawyer or the judge. Like, I would never go into court
Mm-hmm.
labeling somebody as a narcissist, because it really will backfire on you. And there's very likely not ever going to be a chance where they're going to be diagnosed with it, unless it's,
Mm-hmm.
I just haven't heard. I think I've heard of one person actually being diagnosed with it, but I just think because it is such a buzzword now,
Mm-hmm.
and like I was just saying, any negative personality trait that somebody has today, they automatically get slapped with the
Yeah.
narcissist label. And it's not actually fair to those who are seriously experiencing that in their household.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think, if you go to court and you throw that label out, they're not going to take you seriously.
Yeah, I mean, we got to be mindful. So some of the things that you can do is instead of saying narcissist, you just notice their behaviors, right? They're manipulating, they're controlling, they're antagonistic. Like you use words that repetitive words, like they're never bringing the children home, like patterns, right? Like they're manipulating the child time plan, parenting plan, or like just they won't. You're right. They will not. They're not diagnosed. They probably won't get diagnosed, and the court's going to say that doesn't matter. Like you're like we're not legal is not psychological, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and as you were saying too, so sometimes it's just the way people are coping. Like some people just don't cope well
Mm-hmm.
with the divorce, so they could actually just be really upset and really difficult. I mean,
And
um,
defensive,
mhm,
a lot of times in divorce, your character is being attacked and
yeah,
all of these things are being said about you. And so, of course, any normal human being is going
mhm,
to defend themselves if their character is being attacked. So I don't want to take away from that, just the humanness of going through a hard time. But what you can do, like we've stated, I think in every conversation we've ever had, is do the documenting.
mhm,
And that's what you bring to, document the behaviors, like you said, and then let that speak for itself. And that's
mhm,
why we, encourage all of our clients and our listeners to document so thoroughly because, and like I said, if not for nothing else, you would never want to show up to court with your ex having a binder this thick and you have
mhm.
nothing. Like, who are they going to believe at that point, right?
Yeah.
So,
Another thing I want to mention, because I said we can go on forever for this, but we'll wrap it up soon, but is the um, when you're starting, like sometimes you have to start mediating, right? In some states and provinces that you have to start mediating. But also try to emotionally regulate yourself, right? When you're
mm-hmm.
in these meetings, because they will feed off that, right? They may say stuff, or their lawyer may say stuff, and you have to really maintain um, that kind of, you know, semi flat face, right, and not react. So
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing. And also, if you notice, if you are dealing with someone with high conflict, they can't emotionally regulate well, right? They can kind of act like they're 3 years old sometimes. I don't know if you had that, but it's pretty common that they have little temper tantrums like they're children again, where that's not a healthy regulatory system, an emotional system. So that's just another thing I threw out there. But
Yeah, and I think certainly they use that against you. So whether you're in court, you're in mediation, you're in like a co-parenting therapist office, they are
mhm,
going to push those buttons that they know are going to make you react so that then they can turn around and say, see, this is what I have to
mhm,
deal with.
mhm,
And so for like most of us, women who are mothers getting divorced, the kids are the, hottest button that they can
mhm,
press. So like you said earlier, if they are challenging your motherhood, how you're raising the kids, and blaming you for all of the defaults of the kids, then of course that's going to get a reaction out of you.
mhm,
And so, I really work with clients specifically before they go to court, come up with a day of court plan. Like, are
mhm,
you calling a trusted person on your way to court? What type of music are you listening to? I used
mhm.
to listen to this music that I thought would get me so like amped up to go in and fight, but it almost like did such a disservice because then I'm like ready to attack, right? I'm
Right.
not listening to like,
Got to calm the
and
system down.
you have to
Mhm,
be very intentional about that day because your emotions are already so heightened. And so it really is, who are you talking to? What are you
yeah.
eating
Mhm,
before and after court? How are you taking care of yourself? And women specifically aren't great about, I'm generalizing
mhm,
again, but like men are very good about
mhm,
compartmentalizing things. And then,
mhm,
so when they go to court, they've got their court face on. Whereas like when we go to court, we're more emotional and
Mm-hmm.
thinking, everything's a personal attack, whereas for them, it's not. And so just really checking yourself, being in touch with your feelings, and okay, court's not the place to, I used to cry because I was like so emotional, and my dad was like, you have to stop crying in court.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I can't help it. But you do, like, over time, unfortunately, you get used to it, you get stronger, and you build up more resilience, to handle these things in a less emotional manner. And then you can go home and cry. I'm not saying don't,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
be
Yeah.
emotional about it, but like save it for a safe space.
But I also want to say, like, we also have to be practice a lot of self-compassion, right? Because you and I, we're 7, 8 years past this. We know the patterns of these people, our exes. We see it regularly, and it's hard to be emotionally regulated. So it is a practice. It is not easy to do. It's just something that I tell my clients, you tell your clients, because it is, especially with these type of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's really it's one of the better tips, right? But I really love that you say, like, if you're going even to mediation, like quarter mediation, right? Wherever you're going and you have to meet, even on a Zoom call, right? Like, say you're having a Zoom, like online mediation or something. It's still what you said, like, make sure you have eat well, listen to calm music is better, and have that, who you're going to call after, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
self-care, and also know that you're going to get through it, right?
Yes. And, just depending on personality types, there are different things that, I've suggested to clients to do. And me personally, for myself, like, I always had a memento with me of my son, so I could
Mm-hmm.
remember who I was fighting for. So I would carry like a little Lego piece with me and keep it in my pocket. And, I have a client who's very tactile and
Mm-hmm.
fidgety, so she would keep something in her pocket to fiddle with during co-parenting therapy. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything. Of course, you don't want to draw attention to it, but just having some kind of reminder as to like why you're there, or something to do with your hands, instead of, transfer that energy instead of getting yourself so riled up. Do something that is going to, calm you down and make you think, hopefully more clearly than if you're just going in there firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, it's one of the worst things you can do, right? But it took us to learn it before we could actually teach it, right? Like
Oh my
it's,
gosh, years.
yeah. Yeah, years, right? So that's why I want to bring up the self-compassion piece, because it is, yeah, and also, we'll bring this up in probably the post-divorce abuse, about all the grief that goes in there, right? Because there's a lot of exhaustion, a lot of sadness of, you kind of have to realize who you were married to all those years,
Mm,
and that's a whole other topic, and that takes a while to
certainly.
process as well.
Oh,
So, is there any
yeah,
questions?
certainly.
Sorry, is there
It's
any
okay.
questions you have before we wrap up our first series, part one? Because on November 18th, we're back for co-parenting versus counter-parenting, which is legit. It's a true thing, right?
Um,
Yeah.
it is so true. And again, after so many years of doing this, we still get nice reminders of like, oh yeah, I'm still like, we are still actively dealing with some of these things
Yeah.
8 years later. And so
Yeah.
I think that is a point to, a thing to point out to people is that if you have children involved in this divorce, it never really goes away. You're going to
Mm.
continually be dealing with this, hopefully not as severe as you are at the beginning. But, they're still in school, they're still in activities, and you're still going to have to be, co parenting with this person, or counter parenting, like you said. And so lots of tools to be using.
So I have a question. Can you mediate with a narcissist? Well, I mean, we'll answer this together. Some have no choice to start off that way, right? Isn't certain states have to start and I think in UK too, they're starting to do where you have to start mediation first.
So it's not a law here that you have to start with mediation. I always recommend mediation to my clients, A, because it's cheaper
Yeah.
than going the lawyer route. So why not try it? B, because if they do end up in front of a lawyer or a judge and they are going to recommend mediation, you can then turn around and say, we've already tried that route.
Mm-hmm.
I did have to go to mediation, and this is again a pattern with a lot of narcissists. I did mediation for some topic with my ex, and after going through all of the mediation, we finally got the paperwork drawn up.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't sign it.
Yeah.
Didn't sign
Yeah.
it.
That's
And so
common
it's
too, right?
like, yes. And it's such a waste of time. But I will say, and you can jump in,
Mm-hmm.
Karen, with your opinion, but it is sometimes just a box to check to say that you've tried it.
Yeah.
And
And
if
I
it
guess maybe,
works, great, even
yeah,
better,
like
you know?
maybe you can get the goal, the hope is with mediation and high conflict is maybe you can get a couple things dealt with. Like maybe you can
Mm-hmm.
check a couple boxes off. So that would be a first starting point. Another thing is that sometimes in your mediation, listen carefully, because sometimes you might hear what actually they're talking about a lot. Like they may be saying, starting to accuse you about how bad parenting you are. So then you kind of go, oh, well, that's a strategy I could have. That's something they're going to use maybe if we go to court, that they're going to start saying I'm a bad parent. So then you can start, documenting or know that you're not, and keep your, co-parent, like you're parenting really well. You know what I mean? So it can be another tool, because sometimes they like to talk a lot, and they'll express things that they may be trying to use against you. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it's a tip I got from
Yeah.
somewhere else.
I think best case scenario is you get something out of it and you get some things resolved. Worst case scenario is it doesn't work, it's a disaster, and you have more documentation and a witness.
Yeah. And also another thing we didn't mention too is that you want to make sure you have the right, if you can, it's not court ordered mediation, is finding the right mediator who's had experience with difficult personalities, and even the right lawyer, right? Because one of my clients, she's like, I don't think he knows that he's high conflict, and that's her lawyer. And I'm, if you really think you're with a really difficult personality, you make sure you do an interview, and get the right lawyers and mediator, right? That at least you have some, they have some knowledge of how to deal with a difficult personality, because that's
Oh, yeah.
important.
I 100% agree. And, in this work, we do um, network with mediators and lawyers, and we start having a list. So it's, if it's a
Mm-hmm.
high conflict person, this is a great lawyer to work with. If it's a domestic violence situation, this is a great lawyer to work with. If it's amicable, this is a great
Mm-hmm.
lawyer to work with. And just like every other, niche out there, it's not one size fits all. So I certainly would do some research before hiring a lawyer, like you said, if they have no experience, or they're just going to use a template that they use with all their other clients and not really see this for what it is, then yeah, you want to make sure that you're using your money wisely on somebody who's going to help you navigate it.
Yeah, because I just hired the first lawyer. I didn't do what we're telling people to do now. I
Yeah,
just
same. I used my dad's lawyer from his divorce in the 90s.
see.
Because I'm like, if you Google, I mean, all you can do is really Google lawyers, and then you're just throwing a dart at the wall, right? And so I was not aware, and that's part of our job is, education and spreading
Mm-hmm.
awareness. Like, I didn't know this world existed when I was getting divorced, about like building a team and finding these resources.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you Google, they're hard to find. So word of mouth referrals are really good. But it's hard. It's hard for people who don't know. If you don't know, you don't know.
And
So,
we also have to
yeah.
mention the cost, right? Like like that's why you said, like, maybe start with mediation, get something done. Like
Hmm.
that's the hope, right? Because going to lawyers for everything as well, that's why it gets very, very expensive.
Yep.
And we have to be mindful of that, because legal bills can add up really quickly. So that's where you have to be kind of take control of your divorce as well, and don't call the lawyer up when you're mad at your ex. I mean, this is old stuff, but it is something that I did have a friend that did that quite a bit, right? And it cost her a lot of money, but she, as well as you and I, just didn't know, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
The amount of money that I've spent on lawyers in court over the past 8 years, I could probably pay college tuition, which
Yeah.
is, it's sickening, honestly. And
Yeah.
so, yes, if you can get somebody like myself or Karen
Yeah.
on your team at a much cheaper rate, a
Mm-hmm.
mediator to work through some of the issues. So that's not to say you won't need a lawyer or you won't need court later, but hopefully at a reduced price because you're using all of your other resources first.
Yeah. The team approach is something that's kind of been coming up and coming a lot. Is not just, it's not just the lawyer anymore. It's the team, and especially when you're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with challenging people. So, well, this was a great conversation. I knew it would be. So we are back November 18th
Mm-hmm.
for co-parenting versus counter-parenting. Do you have anything up and coming that you want to mention before we wrap up?
Actually in the process of creating an ebook about navigating some of the aspects of navigating divorce and with high conflict, especially. So I will let you know when that is released.
Awesome. And yeah, our just separated will be coming out shortly. We're
Yay.
excited. So yeah, so that's great. Yeah, thanks, Shauna. You've been great support. So yeah, she's a reviewer as well. She looked at it and gave it 2 thumbs up. So appreciate that. So
Again,
anyway,
something I wish I had when I was
yeah,
getting divorced.
you know what? You know what a lot of people are saying? It's like it's a resource book. So you would have taken a page and went, okay, this is what I need today, right? Because I had, I think we say that all the time when we look through the book. Wow, I wish I had this. Everybody that's getting through divorce, just a foundational tool, right? It's just
Mm-hmm.
here it is. It doesn't replace you or me or lawyers or mediators or financial advisors, but it does give you kind of going, oh, okay, I need this. Oh, yeah. So
And yes, I think anything that helps you get organized and stay organized and like put your thoughts down and gives you some action steps to do is very helpful.
yeah. All right. Well, great conversation. And we'll be back November 18th to talk about co
All
parenting.
right,
Bye,
Karen,
everybody.
take
Bye.
care.